When I first noticed that Leisha was disappearing after school, I didn't think much of it. 10th graders are always late. Friends, clubs, crushes that parents are better off not knowing about. But that evening, when he came home after 10, soaked by the light November rain, with red eyes and trembling hands, something inside me snapped. He was silent, avoided eye contact, went into his room and locked himself in, as if he was afraid that I would come and take his last breath away. I remember standing outside the door, listening to his heavy, nervous breathing. At the time, I didn't know what my son was hiding, and he didn't seem to know how to cope with what was weighing on him. But even then, I understood that a crack had appeared in our lives, thin but dangerous, like a line on glass that could widen at any moment. The next day, he left earlier than usual. He didn't eat breakfast or say a word. He just left. He didn't even slam the door. It was as if he had dissolved, leaving an emptiness in the apartment, echoing with my unspoken questions. I tried to calm myself down. Teenage phases, a difficult age, personal experiences. But it all sounded too rational. My instinct, which was rarely wrong, sounded the alarm. And on the third day, when Leisha left again after dark, relatively cheerful, and returned closer to midnight, completely exhausted, I realized that whatever he was doing, it was eating him up inside. That's when I decided to follow him. From the very beginning, this decision seemed wrong to me. A breach of trust, an invasion of privacy. But what kind of trust is it when a child comes home as if from a basement where he was kept locked up? I told myself that it wasn't surveillance, but concern. A lie, of course. But it's easier to believe than to admit that you're just afraid of your own powerlessness. That day, I left the house a couple of minutes after him. There was an early gray-blue haze outside. The air smelled of damp cold and wet iron. I kept 15 steps behind him, like in the cheap detective movies I loved to watch in my youth. Leisha walked quickly, mechanically. He didn't even look back. He crossed the courtyard, went out onto the street, walked to the bus stop, and got on the number 16 bus. I got on the same bus through the back door. I couldn't take my eyes off the back of his head. He sat slightly hunched over, his hands clenched into fists. What was he hiding? Who was he meeting? Why couldn't he tell me, his father? The bus ride took a long time, about 20 minutes. Leisha got off at the stop by the old garages, where there used to be a market, then a makeshift parking lot, and now, a strange wasteland with half-ruined hangars. I chose the moment to get off so that he wouldn't see me. But he didn't look back once. He walked straight ahead, as if someone were pulling him by a string. Being careful, I followed him between two rows of rusty garages. The fog hung low, and you could barely hear the chains on the padlocks jingling. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Leisha walked deeper and deeper until he reached one of the garages, painted dark blue, with a peeling door. He knocked, not like a familiar person, but quietly, cautiously, as if asking permission to enter. The door opened almost immediately. I never saw who was standing inside the garage. Only a silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered. The door opened for a couple of seconds. Leisha quickly darted inside, and everything disappeared. I stood with my back pressed against the neighboring garage, feeling a hot mixture of fear and rage rising in my chest. What was this all about? Blackmail? Bad company? Illegal activities? Who were these people? And why was my son there? The minutes dragged on endlessly. I moved closer and listened. Voices came from inside, a man's and Leisha's, but it was impossible to make out the words. Sometimes the voices seemed to rise, then subside again. Once I heard a sound like a blow. My heart sank. I took a step toward the door, but at that moment it swung open again. The same tall man was standing in the doorway. I still couldn't see his face. The shadow fell in such a way that he seemed faceless. Leisha followed him out, pale, his eyes sunken. The man put his heavy hand on his shoulder and said something in a hoarse voice. At that moment, Leisha suddenly noticed me. I saw him turn even paler. For a moment, his face contorted with fear, real, genuine fear, as if he had seen something terrible. But a second later, he lowered his gaze and quickly walked away without saying a word to me. The man slowly turned his head in my direction, and although the shadows hid his features, I felt that he had seen me. He had seen me and remembered me. As I stood there, trying to decide whether to follow Leisha or that man. The door closed again, and the garage seemed to dissolve into the fog. When I turned around, Leisha had already disappeared into the depths of the courtyard. I caught up with him at the bus stop. He stood with his head down, pretending to look at the empty road, though his fingers were trembling. "Leisha," I said quietly. "What was that?" He flinched but didn't turn around. "Dad, please. Let's not talk about it now." Can you explain what's going on?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said something strange. "If I tell you, it will be worse." I didn't know what to say. I want to take him by the shoulder and make him look me in the eyes. But something held me back, the feeling that he might break right there if I pressed him even a little. We rode home in silence. Leisha sat with his forehead pressed against the cold glass, and I watched his reflection tremble with the vibration of the bus. I didn't sleep that night. I paced around the apartment, listening to the silence, catching every rustle, every shadow. I tried to figure out how to get my son to talk, how to help him without breaking what little trust he had left in me. But the more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. In the morning, I looked into his room. Leisha was sitting on the bed, already dressed, but pale as chalk. He looked older, as if a month, not a night, had passed since I last saw him. "Dad, I'm leaving early," he said, and tried to walk past me. I blocked his way. "Are you going there?" He closed his eyes. "Don't ask questions. Just don't do anything. Please." "Is it because of that man?" "Who is he?" "Dad." His voice broke. "If you get involved, it'll be bad. For me and for you." "Is he threatening you?" He didn't answer, but from the way he turned away, I knew the answer was yes. After Leisha left, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling a determination growing inside me. I won't let this man, whoever he is, interfere in my son's life. I won't let my child go to ruin. All my life, I had tried to be a fair father, not a strict one, but now, for once, I needed to be the one who saved him. I set off after him again, but this time I was better prepared. I grabbed my phone with a recording app, took gloves, even a flashlight, although I laughed at my own paranoia. But behind that laughter lay something else, fear, growing with every passing hour. Leisha took the same route again. Everything repeated itself almost exactly. And at some point, I caught myself thinking that the situation seemed abnormally rehearsed, as if he were living according to pre-written instructions, as if someone were dictating his every move. The difference became apparent when he entered the garage. I didn't wait at the door. I walked around the building to the other side, found a small window near the ceiling, and, standing on an old metal barrel, was able to look inside. And what I saw knocked me off my feet. Inside the garage, there was light, dim, yellowish as if from an old lamp. The space was larger than it had appeared from the outside. The metal walls were covered with rags, old posters, and sheets of plywood, all of which created a feeling of chaos that weighed heavily on my chest. But the walls weren't the main thing. The main thing was the people. Besides the tall man I had seen before, there were two others inside. One was thin, with nervous hands that were constantly rubbing something. The second was strong, with a square jaw and small, dark eyes, which he used to look at Leisha the way a wolf looks at a wounded animal. And my son stood before them, alone. Small, confused, cornered. It was this contrast that stuck in my memory the most. 3 adults against a teenager who looked as if he were being squeezed in a vice. The tall one spoke. I recognized his voice, muffled, hoarse, as if he were chewing gravel. I turned on the recording. The wind carried away the words because the window was tiny, but I understood the gist almost immediately. "You know what you have to do," said the tall one. "It's important to us that you don't let us down. One last time, and you're free. The last time, you're free." The words pierced me like an awl. "Free? From what?" The thin one chuckled nervously. "He's as white as a sheet again. Listen, kid, we're not doing anything bad to you. It's just a task. If you do it, we'll forget about the whole thing, and no one will bother anyone." Leisha stood silently. Then he exhaled. I'll do it." The tall man nodded. "Good, but remember the deal." And then the square-jawed man stepped closer, leaning toward my son so that only a few centimeters separated them. "And if anyone decides to open their mouth, then we'll come to Daddy. They say he's a decent man. It will be a pity." My vision darkened for a second. My fingers clenched into fists on their own. I barely managed to keep myself from rushing downstairs, breaking in, and grabbing that animal by the throat. But I understood that if I rushed out now, Leisha would suffer even more. I needed to understand what exactly they were holding him with. The tall one stepped back slightly, as if to make a point. That's it. You can go. Leisha headed for the exit with quick, jerky steps. I barely managed to jump off the barrel and hide around the corner. He went out and, without looking back, strode away, almost running. But I stayed. As soon as the door closed behind him, I slowly and carefully crept back to the window. The men inside started talking among themselves. Now, there was no need to pretend I wasn't there. I was too angry and too close to the solution. "Do you think he can handle it?" asked the thin one. "He'll manage. He doesn't want his father to get hurt," said the tall one. "Yes, but—" The thin one took a drag on his cigarette. "It's a bit harsh on the kid. It's his father's fault," snapped the tall one. "He signed. He promised. If it weren't for those papers, we wouldn't have come here at all. But now it's too late. Are you sure it's the same man? So many years have passed." "I'm sure," said the tall one harshly. "I remember faces, especially ones like that." Something inside me collapsed. Papers? Signed? So many years have passed. They were talking about me. They were talking about events I barely remembered myself, about debts I thought were settled, about a past I thought had long since sunk into the swamp of my youth. But the most frightening thought was that they had dragged my son into a story that I was supposed to finish. I stood there, unable to feel my feet. Then I slowly turned around and went to where my son had disappeared. But I didn't find him, not that day. He came back late in the evening, again. His face was tired. He looked at me as if he was afraid to see hatred or accusation in my eyes. I was silent for a long time. So was he. Then I said, "Lesh, I need to know the truth." He lowered his head. His shoulders trembled. "Dad, I can't tell you. They said—" "I know," I said. "I was there." He flinched. His eyes widened. His lips trembled. He took a step back, as if from a blow. "Dad, why? You promised you wouldn't." "I couldn't do anything else," I said softly but firmly. "Son, you don't have to go through this alone, no matter what they say." He was silent. Then he sat down on a chair, as if his legs had given way. And he said quietly, "Dad, they said that you owe them money. A lot of money. That you borrowed from them many years ago. And that if you don't do what they ask, bad things will happen to you. And if I don't do it, worse things will happen to you." I couldn't. "Leisha," I had a lump in my throat. "So, they're lying." He raised his head, his eyes full of disbelief fixed on mine. "But they said they have documents." "Yes, it seems they really do have documents. But what's written there?" I took a deep breath. "It's not quite what you think." That evening, I told him everything. About my youth. About how at 22, I got involved in a shady business deal. How I signed a paper without understanding the consequences. How I got out of it later. How I thought it was all over. How I left, moved to another city, and started a new life. How I met his mother. Leisha sat and listened silently. Sometimes his gaze wavered. Sometimes he looked away. But he listened. "You said you never had anything like that." He said quietly. "I wanted to be different for you," I replied. Not the reckless guy I was back then. He said nothing. But from the look on his face, I could tell he was torn inside. He was angry, afraid, confused, and at the same time, relieved. Because now he knew he wasn't alone. But that was only the beginning. I promised myself that I would deal with these people once and for all. But I didn't expect how this story would end. The next morning, I told Leisha to stay home. "They're waiting for me." He began. "I'll go myself," I said. "As long as you're around, they'll pressure you. But if I show up alone, it'll be a different conversation." He shook his head desperately. "Dad, you can't. They're more dangerous than you think. I know what they're like. I've known worse people." He couldn't stop me. And inside me, everything had already burned away. Only determination remained. I arrived at the garages ahead of time. I knew they would be inside. I didn't knock. I just threw the door open. All three of them turned sharply toward me. The tall one narrowed his eyes. "Well, finally. So you found the courage to come after all. Are you done?" I asked coldly. "Stop touching my son. This is between us." The skinny one chuckled nervously. "Between us? Listen, man, you've been thinking for too many years that everything has been forgotten. But we don't forget. The tall man came closer. You have to comply. You signed this paper yourself. No one forced you. That was 20 years ago. That doesn't matter, he said. What matters is that you're a father now. And you know what? He smirked. Children are easier to work with. They're more impressionable. I clenched my fists so hard that my knuckles cracked. If you touch my son, I'll— What? Asked the square-jawed man. You? Us. Do what? He took a step closer to me, and I realized there would be no more talking. But suddenly, something I didn't expect turned the situation around. Suddenly, the door behind me swung open. I turned around. Leisha was standing in the doorway. He was pale, agitated, but determined. Dad, he said, his voice trembling. Step away. Leisha, get out of here. I raised my voice. No, he said. I have to finish this. I can't let you get hurt. I turned to him, but the tall man raised his hand. The boy understands everything. Well done. So did you bring it? Brought what? Leisha slowly took a folder out of his backpack. It was thick, gray, and worn. He held it, as if it weighed a ton. Here, he exhaled. The tall guy took it, opened it, leafed through it, and slowly smiled. Now, that's different. I looked at my son, not understanding. What is it? I whispered. Leisha looked at me with guilty, heavy eyes. Dad, they didn't make me do it. I started digging into your past myself. Back in the summer, I found some old documents at Grandma's. There were names, numbers. I didn't fully understand, but I wanted to help you. I wanted to figure it out. I found these people first, and I thought that if I found out the truth, if I myself somehow— He faltered. I thought I could help. Myself. I stood there as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. It was him. He found them himself. He came to them himself. He got himself involved in this story to protect me. I didn't expect that. It was the twist that turned the whole picture upside down. I thought he'd been backed into a corner. I thought he was being blackmailed. But he was looking for the truth. And he became a pawn because he didn't know who he was dealing with. The tall man slammed the folder shut. Well, that's it. Now it's all over. We got what we wanted. We won't touch the boy or you anymore. See you never. I felt rage boiling inside me. I wanted to grab that folder, tear it up, destroy everything that connected me to the past. But I held back, because now the main thing was to take my son and leave. We left together, without looking back. When we reached the first bus stop, Leisha suddenly started crying, quietly, trembling, as if an icy wall inside him had burst. I hugged him. Son, why didn't you tell me? I was afraid. He sobbed. Afraid you wouldn't understand me. Afraid I would let you down. Afraid you would be disappointed. I shook my head. Leisha, I'm proud of you, but you shouldn't have done it alone. He nodded, and we stood there for a long time. But the story didn't end there, because the hardest part came later, at home, when we were alone and had to talk about things we had never talked about before. About trust, about fears, about the past, about family secrets. We talked until nightfall, and that evening, I realized that my son had grown up, not because he was 16, but because he had done what adults often lack the courage to do. He had faced the shadows of strangers to protect his loved ones. And then I realized that now it was my turn to do the same. This story had to end, but not with running away, not with fear, with the truth. After the day Leisha and I left the garage, life seemed to return to normal. We ate together, went to school and work, discussed trivial matters. He started smiling again, although at first the smile was forced, as if he had to remember how to do it. Over time, it became genuine and warm. But we both understood that what had happened had left a mark much deeper than the bruises on his nervous system or the cracks in my self-deception. The kitchen was quiet in the mornings, but not empty. It was a working silence, thick, as if there was a question hanging between us that no one dared to ask. We both felt that the story was not over. Yes, the danger had passed, they had taken the documents, the threats had disappeared. But inside each of us there remained a debt, not to those people, but to ourselves and to each other. And the finale of this story began with a simple knock on the door. It wasn't the kind of knock that sends a chill down your spine. It was quiet, almost timid. I opened the door. Marina, Leisha's mother's sister, was standing on the threshold. We hadn't seen each other for a long time, too long for it to be a coincidence. May I come in? she asked quietly. Leisha came out of his room and froze when he saw her. He had never been particularly close to his aunt. Too much pain remained after his mother's death for relatives to become close. Marina went into the kitchen. She was agitated. She fiddled with the edge of her scarf, even though it wasn't cold in the apartment. I heard something, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. About those people, about the garages, about the papers. I don't know the whole story, but I need to say something. I was alert. How do you know? A neighbor saw you and Leisha in that neighborhood. I have a friend who lives there. In short, rumors got around. I didn't get involved until I realized that maybe I know more than I should. She fell silent. Then suddenly her voice broke. Your troubles aren't just because of your youth, she said and looked straight at me. They are connected to all you. Everything inside me broke. The name of Leisha's mother sounded like a gunshot. Leisha raised his head, his eyes wide open. Mom? What does Mom have to do with this? Marina sighed heavily. I kept quiet for a long time. Too long. But now, after what happened, you have a right to know. She sat down. We sat down opposite her. Back then, many years ago, when you... She nodded at me. When you tried to get out of that business, all you knew more than you thought. She knew you wanted to leave. And she knew that those people didn't need you anymore. They were looking for a replacement, someone who could become the new courier, liaison, whatever, as long as they could stay in the shadows. And one day, they came to your house. You were at work. All you saw everything. And she took your place. What? I gasped. She continued. She took on part of your debt, part of your obligations. No one would believe that a wife could cover up her husband's past connections. But she went to them herself, so they wouldn't touch you, so you could start over. So Leisha could be born into a normal family and not grow up in fear. I couldn't breathe. Leisha sat with a pale face, as if the whole world had collapsed beneath him. But I swallowed. She never said, she didn't want you to feel guilty, Marina said. And she didn't want her son to live with the thought that his mother was saving his father from criminals. She thought it was all over. They promised her then that she only had to carry out one more assignment. That was all. What task? Leisha asked quietly, his voice barely holding. Marina closed her eyes. She had to give him that folder. Only then. But her voice faltered. She didn't do it. She took the documents and hid them. Silence fell between us like a concrete slab. I couldn't believe it. Wait, I whispered. If she didn't give them the documents, but they thought she did, then Marina nodded. They lost track of her. They thought they had everything, and they left. But they found her notes years later. Different people now. Different heirs of those who were involved back then. They found a reference and realized that the paper had disappeared and that someone was hiding it. They started looking. They found out your address, and they found out you had a son. No one said anything. We sat under the weight of this truth that changed everything. It turns out, Leisha got caught up in this story not because I got involved in my youth, not because he made mistakes himself, but because his mother, many years ago, made a choice for the sake of our family. A choice I never asked her to make, but one that saved me. And now that choice had caught up with us. Leisha said quietly, So, Mom, did all this for us? Marina nodded. She always did everything for both of you. Suddenly, Leisha stood up, so abruptly that his chair nearly tipped over. He walked over to the window, leaned his hands on the windowsill, and stood there silently for a long time. I approached him. So, he flinched but didn't turn around. Dad, all this time I thought I had to save you. That it was my responsibility. That it was my fault. That it was you. That was your past. But it turns out that we continue to pay for a decision that she made alone. I put my hand on his shoulder. Leisha, we can't blame her. She wanted the best. I don't blame her, he whispered. But I wanted to know her so badly. Really know her. Not just as a mom who left to go live with her mom and never came back. Now I realize that. I only knew half of her, and the other half was stronger than I could have imagined. He fell silent. Me too, because suddenly it became clear inside. Everything we had been through was not about debts, threats, or shadows of the past. It was about how the decisions of one generation caught up with another. about how children always follow in their parents' footsteps, sometimes on a bright path, sometimes on the potholes they left behind. But most importantly, it was about the fact that now we had a chance to break this chain. Leisha and I talked with Marina for a long time. She gave us some of his mother's belongings that she had kept all these years: letters, notes, an old notebook. In one of the last entries, I found some lines written unevenly. Sometimes you have to carry something further than you would like. But if it makes my son's world cleaner, then I did the right thing. I hope he will understand one day. We read it together, and we both cried. Quietly, without hysterics, the way grown men cry when walls built over years come crashing down. Several weeks passed. We finally spoke to the investigator. Yes, we had to. The people we encountered turned out to be part of a chain that had been smoldering beneath the surface for a long time, but had now come to light. We gave our testimony. Not everything. They already knew some of the details, and they figured out the rest themselves. They were arrested. The papers were declared invalid. Too many years had passed. The signatures were too blurry, the schemes too dirty. Leisha and I left the police station together. Winter was beginning to seep into the city. The air was clear and sharp. Leisha suddenly said, "Dad, I realized that. I tried to do too much on my own, because I thought it was the right thing to do. But it seems sometimes the right thing is when you're not alone." I smiled. "Son, we can make mistakes. We can fall. We can hide the truth or be afraid of it. But when we finally share, when we take a step toward each other, we become stronger than any past." He nodded. "I don't want to live like you. Not like Mom was forced to. I want to live honestly. And I want—" He paused. "I want us to talk. Even about the bad stuff." "We will," I said. "We always will." We walked home slowly, as if afraid of scaring away this new, fragile honesty. And I realized this story wasn't about debt or criminals or garages. It was about us, about how we search for each other, about how the shadow of the past can become lighter if you step into it together, about how sometimes the truth is scarier than a lie, but it also heals, and about how a son who used to disappear for hours after school eventually came home not as a child, but as a man who understood the value of family. And I understood the value of truth. That night, for the first time in a long time, he came into my room on his own. "Dad, are you asleep?" "No." "Sylvia." He sat down on the edge of the bed. "I wanted to say, I've never been to Mom's grave. I want to go. Together. Will you come with me?" I nodded. He smiled, nervously but sincerely. "Thank you." And in that moment, I realized we're moving on. Not because we've forgotten the past, but because we've finally stopped running from it. We'll go to her. We'll tell her that we're alive, that we're fighting, that we're growing up, that we're learning to understand each other, and that she was right. Sometimes you have to carry something further than you would like. But if you're not carrying it alone, the burden becomes lighter, and the road becomes brighter.